Helen Fischer from Rutgers University. We met the first time in Davos at the prestigious World Economic Forum. Helen spoke about love, and she spoke it in front of dark-suited men. And they were listening. And first they were doing their Blackberry, listening to this woman who will talk about love, Blackberry. And after 2 minutes, all of a sudden they start listening. And at the end of the session, they were totally awake. You make them awake. So I'm happy. I also said this before, but I'm really happy to have you here. Helen gives us a talk about why him, why her.
I'm best known for, first of all, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that you're here. They're going to try and figure this one out. I and my colleagues have put 49 people who are madly in love into a brain scanner. 17 who had just fallen madly in love, 15 who had just been rejected in love, and the last 17 who were in their 50s and reported that they were still in love after an average of 21 years of marriage. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what happens in the brain when you are in love at any age. Then I'm going to talk about my newest research on why you fall in love with one person rather than another. I'm waiting for this to be figured out. Is somebody figuring this thing out? That data comes from studying 8 million people in 40 countries. After I had written my 4th book on the brain circuitry of romantic love, Match.com, the internet dating site, came to me and asked me, why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? And that led me to write oh, you've got it. You got it? Oh. I created a questionnaire that has now been taken by 8 million people in 40 countries. And I've come to believe that we've evolved 4 very broad personality styles throughout the millions of years. And so I want to end my presentation with a discussion of what we know about the human mind and how we can use this in the business community. And I'm waiting for my PowerPoint to come on while I do that. I guess meanwhile, I was sitting in the audience earlier today, and they asked how many people in the audience thought that they felt that there was something new that was going to come across and really change the world. And I raised my hand, and I think it's neuroscience. We are really beginning to understand the human brain. We're really beginning to understand how it evolved. We're beginning to understand some of the genetics behind personality. And as we move along, I mean, the internet is a wonderful place, and we have, but it's a tool, and it's the human brain that's going to be using that tool. And the more we understand this human brain, the more we're going to create all kinds of connections with one another based on neuroscience and physiology. And I'm praying that my PowerPoint comes on, because I've got some wonderful slides, and I don't know whether to start in without it, or let's see what. Well, thanks for your patience. In the jungles of Guatemala, there stands a temple. It's built by the grandest Sun King, of the grandest city-state, Tikal, of the grandest New World empire, the Maya. His name was Casacanchao. He stood over 6 feet tall. He lived until his 80s, and he was buried beneath this temple that he built in or around 720 AD. And Mayan inscriptions report that he was madly in love with his wife. She died young, so he built a temple for her facing his. And every spring and every autumn, exactly at the equinox, the sun rises behind his temple and perfectly bathes her temple with his shadow. And in the evening, as the sun sets behind her temple, it perfectly shadows his temple with her shadow. As the sun sets, 1,300 years later, these lovers still touch from the grave. Around the world, does this thing work now? No. Okay. Around the world, people love. They sing for love. They dance for love. They compose poems and songs and stories about love. They retell myths and legends about love. They have love charms, love potions, and love magic. We've looked now, anthropologists have now looked in 170 societies. There's no negative evidence. Everywhere in the world where we've looked at all, people pine for love, they live for love, they kill for love, and they die for love. It's one of the most powerful brain systems on Earth. In fact, it's much more powerful than the sex drive. You know, if you casually ask somebody to go to bed with you and they say, no, thank you, you don't kill yourself. But around the world, people have crimes of passion. As a matter of fact, I was recently speaking with a neuroscientist who felt that the worldwide number of crimes of passion is greater than the number of people who die of cancer. So in 1998, I began to study the brain circuitry of romantic love by putting people into a brain scanner. This is a slide from New Yorker magazine, who got wind of our studies. And I wanted to study this brain system, what the ancient Greeks called the madness of the gods. So I started putting people into the brain scanner who had just fallen madly in love. And the first thing that I and my colleagues found was activity in a tiny little factory near the base of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, particularly in little cells that make dopamine, a natural stimulant. In fact, it's exactly the same region that becomes active when you feel the rush of cocaine. And it's part of the brain called the reward system, the brain system for wanting, as you reach for a piece of chocolate, as you want a cigarette, as you want a raise, as you want a drink. Is this part of the brain, the reward system, that is beginning to activate, associated with craving, with focus, with energy, with elation, and with motivation? In this case, the motivation to win life's greatest prize, which is an appropriate mating partner. I then began to study rejection in the brain. I began to think to myself, well, who cares if somebody figures out what happens in the brain when you're madly in love? It's much more important to find out what happens when you've been rejected in love. I mean, this is when you suddenly become a menace to society, with stalking, with depression, with homicide, and with suicide. As a matter of fact, Emily Dickinson once said, "Parting is all we need to know of hell." And indeed, it is hell. We're just finishing now our final analysis of what happens in the brain when you've been rejected in love. I had predicted in a book that came out in 2004 that it was an addiction, that romantic love and rejection was a particularly powerful addiction. And in fact, this is what we found. We found activity in brain regions associated with profound addiction, particularly this nucleus accumbens. Romantic love is an addiction, a perfectly wonderful addiction when it's going well, and a perfectly horrible addiction when it's going poorly. And so in our most recent experiment, we tried to figure out whether you can sustain romantic love. All of our belief systems say that you cannot remain in love with a long-term partner. So we found 17 people in and around New York City in their 50s who reported that they were still in love, not loving, but in love with a partner long-term. And we put them in the machine, and as it turns out, we found activity in exactly the same brain regions as we did among those who had just fallen madly in love. The only real difference is we no longer found activity in brain regions associated with anxiety, and instead we found new activity in brain regions associated with calm. Love is many things to many people, but I think it is primarily a drive. I'd always thought it was an emotion or a group of emotions. And of course, we have a lot of emotions when we're madly in love, but it's basically a drive. I've read a great deal of world poetry because I think it's such a good illustration of the emotions. And I think the best summary statement of what love really is was by Plato, in which he said, the God of love lives in a state of need. Romantic love is a need, a craving, a homeostatic imbalance that evolved, I think, millions of years ago in order to enable our ancestors and people today to focus their mating energy on just one individual at a time and start the mating process. But why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? This is what Match.com, the internet dating site, came and asked me almost 5 years ago. And since then, and at the time I said, I don't know. Psychologists know that we tend to fall in love with somebody from the same socioeconomic background, same general level of intelligence, same general level of good looks, similar level of education and religious and social values. Your childhood plays a role, but nobody knows how. Timing plays a role. But you can walk into a room and everybody is from your background and same general level of intelligence and good looks. And you don't fall in love with all of them. So I began to think, maybe basic body chemistry plays a role. Maybe we're naturally pulled towards some people rather than others. So I began to look through all of the genetic data, the data on neurotransmitters, the data on hormones, and to see if there were some chemicals in the brain associated with personality traits that drove you to be towards some people rather than others. Now, there's a lot of chemicals in the brain, but most of them keep the eyes blinking or the heart beating, etc. There's very few that are associated with personality traits. And those few are these four brain systems: the norepinephrine dopamine system, the serotonin system, the testosterone system, and the estrogen and the oxytocin system. So what I did is I created a questionnaire to see to what degree you express the traits associated with these four chemical systems. And then 8 million people have taken the questionnaire. I watched in a group of 28,000 people who was naturally drawn to whom. So I'm going to go through the very broad personality styles. We're all a combination of all of them. These are brain systems, not cubby holes, but we do have personalities. We express some more than others. And then I want to talk about who's drawn to who, and then how I feel this can be used in the business community. The dopamine norepinephrine system, I looked in 40,000 people. In this system, if you tend to be very expressive of these two chemical systems, I call them the explorer, bad term, but it's the best I had at the time. They're novelty-seeking, risk-taking, energetic, spontaneous, impulsive, optimistic, sexual, curious. They've got the most interests, highly creative. If you give somebody L-DOPA for Parkinson's, creativity tends to go up. Often very liberal, open-minded. There's a downside to every personality type. They tend to be more manic, unpredictable, reckless, and unreflective. These people look out, not in. I did a study of 178,000 people to see what words these people used. Adventure, top word used by this high dopamine type. Spontaneity, energy, new, fun, traveling, passion, active, outgoing. I think Obama is a perfectly wonderful example of that. He even moves like a high dopamine person. High dopamine person moves with the sense of style, which he does. And they also have quite a bit of a facial expression, which he has. Highly optimistic man. There's a humor magazine in the United States called The Onion. On the day he won the election, it read, "Black man given worst job in the world." And indeed, he got it and still has it. Serotonin, I call them the builder. It's a bad term. Had I read my Plato at the time, I would have called them the guardian. These are the pillars of society. The genetics of the serotonin system are associated with being conventional, traditional, cautious. They're not scared, but they're cautious, calm, social, very managerial. These are the middle managers often of the world. Orderly, persistent, details. They like the details. Don't give them the big theory. They like the details. Loyal, conscientious. They respect authority. They like to follow the rules. They tend to be more religious, and they're very good with numbers. A bad side of them, they tend to be more stubborn, close-minded, controlling, etc. The top word these people use is family. Morals, respect, loyal, trustworthy, use that one twice, and values. And Gordon Brown, of course, these people haven't taken my questionnaire, but just by watching what they say, reading what The Economist and other magazines say about them, this is from The Economist, that he's a control freak, very detail-oriented, very much of a networking man, religious, frugal, PhD in history. I think that actually does say something about the details. These historians do like the details. I think Colin Powell's another very good example. The third type is the high testosterone type. I call them the director. Plato called them the rational. That's a better term for it. In a study of 40,000 people, analytical, logical, strategic, very strategic, direct, decisive, tough-minded, very good at what scientists call rule-based systems. Everything from math, computers, engineering, music is a very structured thing. Skeptical, rank-oriented. You inject testosterone in a monkey and it'll fight for rank. Emotionally contained. These are the people at Davos who don't move their face. They move the mouth, but none of the face. And the fingers, of course, with the BlackBerry. Highly self-disciplined and emotionally contained. Poorer verbal skills and poorer people skills tend to be aloof and more aggressive. The words they use, intellect, there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence out there, but this is the word they use. Debate, geek, nerd, ambitious, driven, politics, challenge. They got to have it be real. They're the least religious of the group. Sarkozy, I'm sorry, there's some people in the audience who know much better than I do. Direct, blunt, tough-minded, and I think, of course, we're a combination of all of them, very much of the explorer, too. And it was very interesting, after the G20 met in London, he called Obama weak. And the director hits you in the face, the explorer stabs you in the back, and is much more nuanced. I think these two men come from very different biological personality styles and simply didn't understand each other. Hillary Clinton, I think, is a very good example of a woman who's high testosterone type. I don't know if you were watching CNN recently, and when she was in Haiti, not only did she showed almost no facial expression while she was with bodies all around her. Very much of the high testosterone. The Chinese were astonished at how blunt she was. Fourth type, estrogen and oxytocin. These people see the big picture, imaginative, fine linguistic skills, very fine people skills, intuitive. It's called theory of mind, trusting, nurturing, emotionally expressive, egalitarian, idealistic. Downside of it is indecisive. These people live in a world of it depends. Well, it depends. We could do this, we could do that. It depends. They see all these possibilities. More unforgiving, gullible, effusive, etc. The top word they use is passion in this study of 178,000. Real, heart, kind, sensitive. These are the big readers of the world. Sweet, random. The other three types are not big on random. It's one of their top 10 words, and empathy. And I think Bill Clinton's a very good example. Language skills, the whole world knows he can't stop talking. Real people skills, I'm glad our government sent him into North Korea to get those girls out, and not his wife. Very emotionally expressive, cried when Hillary gave her speech at the Democratic Convention. And I don't know about the rest of the world, but in America, he's well known for the statement, "I feel your pain." Probably he does have more mirror neurons in his mind, and probably does feel some of your pain. And he's high on testosterone. You can be high on testosterone and estrogen, high on one, high on the other. But he's very much, and he's even got the baby face of the high estrogen type of person. I think Charles Darwin was another supremely fine negotiator, synthesized all of science at the time. And I think that Klaus Schwab is the world's finest negotiator. He sees the enormous picture in all the relationships and has tremendous compassion for humankind on Earth. So I've got, you take my questionnaire and you are given a pie chart. We're all a combination of all of them, of course. And then I was able to study a lot of other things about many of the habits of these people. But Match.com wanted to know, they didn't really care who you are. They were interested in why you fall in love with one person rather than another. So I watched in 28,000 people who's drawn to whom. Female explorer goes for the male explorer. Male explorer goes for the female explorer. Female builder, the traditional type, wants traditional. Male builder, traditional, wants traditional. In these two cases, similarity attracts. Female director, Hillary Clinton, goes for the male negotiator, the opposite. Male director goes for the female negotiator, their opposite. Female negotiator goes for the male director, and the male negotiator for the female director. That's Bill Clinton and Hillary. In this case, opposites attract. So I think that romantic love and many of our relationships are something like a funnel. The timing is right. You walk into the room and you look at them. Right off the bat, within less than a tenth of a second, they're either in or they're out. Too tall, too short, too thin, too fat, too old, too young, too scruffy, too scrub, they're out. You walk over and you speak to them. If they open their mouth and they've got the wrong accent, they're out. And you keep talking to them and you begin to figure out their values. If they voted for Sarah Palin, they're out. And all along, there are these breaking points. But what I'm trying to add is the second half of the puzzle, that whole part of your biology that naturally pulls you towards some people rather than others. So I just want to conclude with two things. I think these brain systems evolved. I think millions of years ago on the grasslands of Africa, we needed some of all of these types. Let's say we used to travel in these little hunting and gathering groups of about 25 individuals. About 10 to 15 of them were adolescents and juveniles. That leaves about 10 or 12 grown-ups. And if they're all going over the hill and you suddenly see a pile of mushrooms, you can't have all the grown-ups saying, let's try the mushrooms. You need some people who say, I don't think so. I mean, we've never tried the mushrooms before. It's not part of our tradition. You need some builders, some high serotonin type. You need a few of the director types who says, well, let's make an experiment. Let's feed the mushrooms to the dog and see whether it works. And you need some of the high estrogen negotiator type who say, well, let's sit down and talk about the mushrooms and see what else we know about mushrooms. And in this way, I think these four broad brain systems evolve together. And I've become interested in seeing how these could be used in the business community. For example, as an anthropologist, if I were to hire people, I would like to know what some of their basic broad personality style was like. I would like to use them with clients to reach the clients. I'd like to use them in advertising to appeal to certain kinds of minds. And I think I would even build a corporate board using the brain systems that scientists are beginning to use. So I'm going to close with this. This is basically a metaphor for what I'm really trying to say. For millions of years, our ancestors, women tend to get intimacy from face-to-face talking. We swivel until we're facing each other. We do what is called the anchoring gaze, and we talk. And I think that comes from millions of years of holding your baby in front of your face, cajoling it, reprimanding it, educating it with words. Men tend to get intimacy from side-by-side doing. Soon as he looks up, he'll look away. I think that comes from millions of years of sitting behind a rock or sitting behind a bush, staring out over the veldt, trying to wait for that moment to hit that buffalo in the head with a rock. You really can't be going like this if you're going to do your daily job. And the problem in our modern world is when we don't understand who we're talking to. Thank you very much.